Actress Diane Keaton, an icon of American cinema for over 5 decades, passed away in California at the age of 79. The news of her death shocked her fans around the world, but the official statements were brief and lacking detail. Her family announced her passing, but did not specify the cause. Many expected the death to be straightforward, perhaps due to old age or a common illness, but the truth revealed by the last doctor who examined her body tells a far stranger story. According to medical insiders, her death was initially reported as pneumonia, a primary bacterial infection affecting the lungs. However, the attending forensic doctor, someone with more than 30 years of experience in autopsies, stated that what he observed in Diane Keaton's body was unlike anything he'd seen in decades of practice. It was a chain of biological phenomena that had never been recorded in medical literature, a series of cellular reactions and tissue anomalies so unusual that the official reports could not, and perhaps would not, capture them. Hours after the autopsy, the doctor's preliminary findings were sealed. The notes disappeared from the hospital's database, and the simple cause of death, pneumonia, was maintained in public records. The story, however, did not end there. In halls of Los Angeles medical institutions, that night remains whispered about, a taboo subject, a secret locked away in both the minds of those who witnessed it and the confidential files that vanished from hospital servers. According to several anonymous sources, the chief doctor ordered that no unusual findings be included in the official records, while other members of the forensic team were reassigned or asked to sign confidentiality agreements. The body that had once seemed strong, resilient, and full of life appeared, under the bright fluorescent lights of Cedars-Sinai's autopsy room, to be experiencing a reaction that defied standard explanation. The lungs did not match the typical signs of pneumonia. The tissue showed faint pink discoloration, rather than the expected dull gray or red. Under special lighting, certain areas of the lungs emitted a soft glow, a sign of enzyme activity still occurring even after death, something usually observed only in living cells. On her left shoulder, a pale silver mark appeared, waxy and cold, unlike bruising or scars from surgery, suggesting a cellular regeneration process rather than necrosis. Further examination revealed small scaly lesions around the site of prior skin cancer treatment, but these cells did not behave as expected under the microscope. Instead of breaking down, they seemed to misfire, almost as if the body were trying to heal itself long after it should have stopped. The preliminary notes from the autopsy described abnormal cellular activation and reaction patterns inconsistent with bacterial infection, but these were removed from the final records. Diane Keaton's body, in the words of the forensic team, seemed to operate on the edge of medical understanding, as though her tissues held memories of past illnesses, treatments, and decades of stress that ordinary science could not fully explain. While public announcements simplified her death to pneumonia, the truth, hidden in sealed files, whispered conversations, and vanished medical reports, suggests a far more complex story. Rumors of autoimmune reactions, cellular anomalies from ultraviolet light therapy, and long-term metabolic effects circulated among doctors in Los Angeles, creating a puzzle that some experts said might never be solved. For those who knew her, this was not merely the passing of a beloved actress, but the quiet disappearance of someone whose body had fought battles unseen, a life that had endured both the glamour and the hidden struggles of Hollywood, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt the medical community and the fans who admired her from afar. The early morning of October 12, 2025, in Los Angeles was calm, almost eerily so. A thin layer of mist hovered over the western sky, softening the streetlights like a gentle breath of night not yet fully gone. Inside the basement of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, the autopsy room lay silent, illuminated only by the cold glare of fluorescent lights reflecting off a metal table. On that table rested the body of Diane Keaton, covered with a thin white sheet, a scene that would later become legendary among medical circles for reasons that had nothing to do with ordinary forensic procedure. The clock outside the door had stopped at 12:48 a.m., marking a moment frozen in time, though the events that unfolded afterward would ripple through professional community for years. The air in the room was thick, almost frozen in its heaviness, swallowing most sounds except the faint scratching of a pen against paper. The lead forensic doctor, who had overseen countless autopsies during his 30-year career, remained seated beside the table, staring silently at the results displayed on the monitor. The lung tissue images glowed faintly under the screen's blue light, casting shadows across his tired face. According to standard protocol, the autopsy was primarily meant to confirm the cause of death, as the death certificate had already been signed less than 7 hours earlier, listing primary bacterial pneumonia as the definitive cause. The certificate was clean, concise, and unquestionable. Yet, as the doctor studied the tissue samples, it became immediately clear that the data did not align with what any pneumonia case should resemble. The color, texture, and microscopic behavior of the cells were inconsistent, unusual, and completely unexpected. When the white sheet was lifted to examine her shoulder and neck, a pale silver mark became visible. Approximately 7 centimeters long, flat, cold, and waxy, it bore no resemblance to a surgical scar, bruising, or injection site. Under the microscope, the skin tissue appeared to be engaged in some form of abnormal regeneration, a process more typical of living cells than a post-mortem tissue. A technician whispered, "It looks more like tissue regeneration than necrosis," and the comment was quickly stifled by the hum of the ventilation system and the subtle gestures of colleagues signaling silence. Additional scaly lesions were observed around the areas where Diane had undergone surgery for squamous cell carcinoma decades earlier. The cells did not display standard necrotic patterns, but seemed to misfire, almost as if the body's biological systems were attempting a repair that could not be completed. The preliminary note by the lead doctor described this phenomenon as abnormal cellular activation, yet less than an hour later, that note mysteriously vanished in the official records. Even the lungs presented anomalies. Certain areas emitted a faint luminescence under blue light, indicating residual enzyme activity, a phenomenon typically only observed in living tissue. Observers in the room whispered to one another, noting how the body seemed to behave as if it were still trying to heal itself long after death had occurred. The forensic notebook contained only a single line regarding the lung tissue. Reaction pattern does not correspond with bacterial spread. Possible autoimmune response. While brief, these words caused a pause among the team, signaling that they were observing something far outside normal medical expectations. Later that night, attempts to save the preliminary report failed when the hospital's internal server inexplicably went offline for 45 minutes. By the following morning, the pathology system was locked, several team members were reassigned, and confidentiality agreements were enforced, ensuring that the unusual observations remained hidden from public scrutiny. As journalists from national outlets inquired, the hospital offered only the official statement. No cause of death other than pneumonia had been identified, and the family's privacy would be respected. Meanwhile, within the tightly knit Los Angeles medical community, whispers spread of a body behaving in ways that defied ordinary explanation. Doctors speculated about autoimmune reactions, phototherapy effects from decades prior, and rare metabolic phenomena, all pointing to the possibility that Diane Keaton's body had experienced a final set of reactions that no living person had ever documented. The autopsy room, usually a space of precise medical procedure, had become a stage for a mystery, one that blurred the boundaries between life, death, and the lingering remnants of a body that had fought silently against decades of illness, environmental exposure, and metabolic stress. Diane Keaton's life, though celebrated in Hollywood for her charm, intelligence, and iconic performances, was also marked by private health struggles that few outside her close circle fully understood. Long before her final moments at Cedars-Sinai, Diane had faced a series of medical challenges that would quietly shape her body and influence the unusual reactions observed after her death. In the early 1970s, as she emerged from Broadway and began to build her film career, Diane experienced her first serious health scare, a small dark spot on her right temple. Initially mistaken for makeup residue, the spot was later diagnosed as basal cell carcinoma, a form of skin cancer. At that time, Hollywood paid little attention to sun protection or safe lighting, and actors were often subjected to hours of intense exposure under halogen lamps, with makeup and sweat blending under the harsh lights. Diane's treatment required surgical removal of the affected area, and over the years, she underwent multiple similar procedures on her face, neck, and shoulders. These surgeries left faint scars, subtle reminders of battles her public persona rarely revealed. The skin surgeries, combined with repeated exposure to ultraviolet light during film shoots, made her unusually sensitive to sunlight. Family members and close friends recalled that throughout the 1980s, Diane avoided going outside at noon, often covering her neck and arms with gloves and long sleeves, and wearing wide-brimmed hats even in casual settings. The long-term effect of these early interventions created a condition in which her skin reacted dramatically to sunlight, a sensitivity that persisted throughout her life. Later, Diane underwent phototherapy treatments for skin cancer, a procedure involving exposure to ultraviolet light meant to prevent recurrence. While the treatments kept her skin smooth and relatively free of lesions, they also caused subtle genetic changes in her cells, leaving her body permanently sensitive to light. Decades later, Stanford researchers would study a phenomenon known as photomutation, a condition in which ultraviolet exposure can alter DNA and affect multiple organs, including the lungs, a fact that coincidentally aligned with the autopsy findings that showed faint luminescent reactions in her lung tissue. In addition to skin-related issues, Diane Keaton faced internal challenges that were less visible but equally significant. In her memoir, she revealed a personal struggle with bulimia nervosa during her mid-20s, a disorder that caused long-term damage to her immune and digestive systems. For 5 years, she lived in a cycle of overeating to fill emptiness and then punishing herself, an ordeal hidden behind the radiant charm of her public persona in films like Annie Hall. Medical studies show that individuals who experience prolonged eating disorders can develop weakened immune responses, making them more vulnerable to infections and slower to respond to treatment. In Diane's later years, this vulnerability may have contributed to her unusual response to bacterial pneumonia, as her body's ability to absorb medication and mount a defense against infection could have been compromised. Furthermore, records indicate that in 2023, she was briefly hospitalized for acute bronchitis, though she recovered quickly, surprising doctors with her resilience. In the months that followed, however, her respiratory health declined subtly, requiring supplemental oxygen at night. Despite these challenges, Diane maintained her public appearances, attending film premieres and fashion events, often downplaying health concerns with a polite smile, remarking simply that she had a mild cold. Her lungs, examined during the final autopsy, showed small erosions and enlarged vessels, evidence of tissue repeatedly damaged and healed, reflecting a lifetime of internal struggle. Combined with decades of sun damage, phototherapy, and previous illnesses, Diane's body had endured complex stressors that ordinary medical records barely captured. Experts reviewing her case speculated that the unusual reactions observed in her autopsy, cellular regeneration, glowing lung tissue, and abnormal immune responses, were likely the result of cumulative effects from a lifetime of medical interventions, autoimmune reactions, and the body's persistent attempts to repair itself. In essence, Diane Keaton's body had silently carried the scars of both her health battles and the rigorous demands of Hollywood for decades, creating a scenario in which her death could not be easily explained by conventional diagnoses. It was not merely pneumonia that claimed her life, but the cumulative toll of years of hidden struggle, genetic changes, and cellular reactions that pushed her body to the edge of known medical understanding. These hidden battles, largely unseen by the public, formed the foundation for the mysteries that arose in her final hours, leaving doctors and medical researchers puzzled and the public unaware of the remarkable resilience and vulnerability of a woman who had captivated the world with her talent and grace. The autopsy of Diane Keaton revealed a series of anomalies that challenged conventional medical understanding, leaving even seasoned forensic doctors bewildered. As the lead pathologist and his team examined her body, they discovered tissue behaviors that defied normal postmortem expectations. The lungs, for instance, did not show typical signs of bacterial pneumonia. Instead, they contained faintly pink regions, soft and almost glowing under blue light, which indicated ongoing enzyme activity. Such a phenomenon is extremely rare and typically only observed in living tissue, suggesting that Diane's body was engaging in processes usually impossible after death. The team documented these findings, noting patterns of cellular misfiring, unusual inflammatory responses, and evidence of repeated tissue regeneration. Particularly striking was a silver mark on her left shoulder, flat, waxy, and cold, unlike any known scar or lesion. Microscopic analysis revealed that the skin cells in that area seemed to mimic early-stage squamous lesions, but without the expected necrosis, indicating a biological process attempting repair instead of decay. One technician quietly whispered, It's like her body refuses to let go, and the statement, though muted, reflected the shared sense of wonder and unease among the forensic team. Following the initial examination, 3 primary theories emerged to explain these unusual phenomena. The first centered on an autoimmune reaction. According to this hypothesis, Diane's immune system, strengthened over decades to fight illnesses and previous skin cancers, might have eventually turned against her own body. In this scenario, the immune cells attacked healthy tissue, particularly the lungs, resulting in damage and cellular misfires that were misinterpreted as a pneumonia-like condition. Some experts noted that autoimmune pulmonary disorders can present with minimal external symptoms, allowing internal damage to progress unnoticed until a catastrophic failure occurs. The second theory examined the long-term effects of phototherapy and ultraviolet exposure. Diane had undergone multiple high-intensity UV treatments for basal cell carcinoma, leaving her skin permanently photosensitive. Decades later, research on photomutation suggested that accumulated UV exposure could alter cellular DNA, potentially affecting organs beyond the skin, including the lungs. In her autopsy, the faint bioluminescence of lung tissue might indicate a lingering photochemical reaction, as if the body retained a cellular memory of past light-based treatments. While the idea seemed unusual, medical experts acknowledge that photochemical effects in humans are still poorly understood, particularly when combined with decades of prior illnesses and treatments. The third theory revolved around metabolic and drug-related complications. Records showed that in the weeks leading up to her death, Diane had been prescribed a broad-spectrum antibiotic. However, blood tests revealed her body absorbed almost none of the medication, likely due to residual effects from her earlier eating disorder and digestive issues. Without proper absorption, chemical imbalances can form, creating rare toxic compounds in the bloodstream. Her plasma exhibited elevated lactate levels, consistent with what specialists called end-stage metabolic reversal, a state in which the body's own systems inadvertently create harm rather than sustain life. Observers noted that her pulse and oxygen levels fluctuated unpredictably during her final hours, suggesting the body's self-regulating mechanisms had begun to fail. While each theory, autoimmune reaction, phototherapy remnants, and metabolic imbalance, offer potential explanations, none were definitive on their own. What they shared, however, was a remarkable absence of these anomalies in official records. The preliminary findings, the glowing tissues, and the silver shoulder mark all disappeared from the hospital's final report. The Cedars-Sinai server went offline mysteriously, and confidentiality agreements prevented further discussion. Among doctors in Los Angeles, whispers of these anomalies spread quietly, sparking speculation that the body's final hours were a complex interplay of factors accumulated over decades, ultimately defying the simplicity of pneumonia as a cause of death. Diane Keaton's passing became a case study in mystery, a convergence of medical, environmental, and historical influences, leaving professionals and admirers alike to wonder whether her body had quietly resisted, repaired, and ultimately reached a threshold beyond human comprehension. The autopsy room, once a place of routine procedure, had become a stage for the inexplicable, a silent testament to resilience, fragility, and hidden complexity of a life that had endured extraordinary challenges long before her final breath, and the weeks before her passing. Diane Keaton's health appeared fragile, yet she maintained a facade of normalcy that belied the complexities unfolding within her body. Friends and colleagues noticed subtle changes. Her skin seemed paler than usual, almost translucent, reflecting light with an unusual shimmer, and her hands remained consistently cold to the touch. Photographs taken at her Los Angeles home in September 2025 depicted a woman who appeared dignified and composed, yet those who looked closely observed a face hollowed by time and illness. The eyes, once bright with the energy of a long and celebrated career, had begun to sink slightly, hinting at the toll taken by decades of medical challenges. Diane's voice, once strong and expressive, had grown softer, a sign of physical fatigue. Even in casual conversations, she seemed to speak deliberately, conserving energy as though aware of the limits imposed by her body. Despite these changes, Diane continued her daily routines with remarkable determination. She walked her 2 small dogs, Reggie and Clover, around the quiet streets of Brentwood, always fully covered in gloves, long sleeves, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her sensitive skin from sunlight. At home, she maintained a life of quiet discipline, avoiding unnecessary exposure to light and stress. Observers recalled that she moved with a measured pace, as if the simplest movements required careful calculation to avoid strain. Though outwardly composed, her medical team noted subtle internal anomalies. Blood oxygen levels fluctuated unpredictably, and her pulse became irregular on certain days, signs that her body's ability to regulate itself was beginning to fail. Her lungs, previously resilient despite a history of respiratory infections and mild bronchitis, showed signs of repeated damage and healing, a pattern that suggested the tissue had been under chronic stress for decades. Specialists reviewing these developments concluded that Diane's body had been fighting itself in the final months as the cumulative effects of phototherapy, immune sensitivity, prior illnesses, and decades of environmental and metabolic stress pushed her systems to the brink. Yet Diane remained alert and conscious, a testament to the endurance of her mind even as her physical systems faltered. In the days immediately preceding her death, she engaged in simple activities, reading news on her iPad, watching old interviews of herself, and conversing with close friends and family. Despite the underlying physiological turmoil, she occasionally smiled, showing the same humor and grace that had endeared her to millions. Doctors monitoring her condition noted that her body responded unpredictably to routine care. For instance, oxygen supplementation was inconsistently effective, and minor interventions produced disproportionate fluctuations in vital signs. Specialists later suggested that this instability could be the result of an extreme form of metabolic reversal, where the body's regulatory mechanisms, after decades of adaptive responses to stress and treatment, begin to malfunction. In combination with her history of autoimmune sensitivity, phototherapy exposure, and past nutritional deficiencies, Diane's final days reflected a fragile equilibrium, one in which minor disruptions could trigger cascading effects throughout her system. The pattern of decline did not follow typical trajectories seen in elderly patients with respiratory illnesses. Instead, her body appeared to be attempting repairs even as it failed, a phenomenon echoed in the unusual observations documented during her autopsy. In essence, Diane Keaton's final days were marked by a silent struggle between life and decline, resilience and fatigue, and repair and failure. While the official narrative would later simplify her passing to pneumonia, the reality was far more complex. A sophisticated, mysterious interplay of decades-long medical influences that culminated in her body quietly reaching its threshold. Those who witnessed her final moments described a woman who, though visibly weakened, remained mentally engaged and physically aware, a living testament to her enduring strength and determination, even as the hidden mechanisms within her body quietly unraveled. Her final days, therefore, were not just a prelude to death, but a demonstration of the extraordinary complexity and resilience of a human life pushed to its physiological limits, leaving unanswered questions that would puzzle medical professionals for years to come. Despite the complexity and unusual findings observed during Diane Keaton's autopsy, the official narrative presented to the public remained remarkably simple and straightforward. She had died of bacterial pneumonia. Cedars-Sinai Hospital released a brief statement confirming her death, respecting the family's privacy, but offering no further details about the peculiar reactions found in her tissue or the anomalies recorded by the forensic team. In the immediate days following her passing, newspapers, television channels, and social media outlets circulated virtually identical obituaries. Headlines read with a polished uniformity: "Actress Diane Keaton passes away at 79, Hollywood mourns iconic star, and cause of death pneumonia." Across major entertainment news networks like CNN, NBC, ABC, and online platforms such as People and Variety, no mention was made of the silver mark on her shoulder, the faint bioluminescent activity in her lungs, or the missing files from Cedars-Sinai's internal system. The consistency of the narrative created an impression that the medical and investigative details had been neatly resolved, even though insiders knew the truth was far more complex. Within the medical community, however, whispers of Diane Keaton's unusual physiological reactions began to circulate quietly, fueling speculation and curiosity. Doctors and technicians who had been present during the autopsy spoke cautiously, often under anonymity, to avoid potential professional repercussions. According to a leaked source, the preliminary autopsy notes describe patterns of tissue regeneration, unusual enzyme activity, and cellular misfires that did not match any known cases of pneumonia or autoimmune disorders. One technician told reporters, It was as if her body had been trying to repair itself after decades of battles, but no one knew what the repair was aimed at. Despite these accounts, Cedars-Sinai's official records remained unchanged, with the hospital citing privacy concerns and respecting the family's wishes. In Hollywood, where gossip often spreads faster than facts, the public's perception of Diane's death was shaped entirely by the sanitized version. Social media posts mourned her charm, her wide-brimmed hat, and her enduring performances, but few realized the hidden story behind the passing of a woman whose body had silently defied conventional medical understanding until the very end. Entertainment journalists who attempted to investigate further often encountered roadblocks. Sources familiar with Diane's medical history were reluctant to comment, citing confidentiality agreements and the hospital's strict protocols. Attempts to access historical data about her previous treatments, phototherapy sessions, or participation in immune system studies at UCLA were met with polite refusals or ambiguous statements that avoided confirming any details. Meanwhile, medical professionals in Los Angeles continue to debate the implications of the autopsy findings behind closed doors. The unusual cellular activity and tissue responses were discussed in hushed conversations in hospitals and cafes, with physicians speculating about possible causes, such as delayed autoimmune reactions, residual effects of ultraviolet exposure, and the long-term consequences of prior metabolic and nutritional challenges. The juxtaposition between the official narrative and the complex reality created a tension between public perception and professional awareness. To the outside world, Diane Keaton's death was a quiet, dignified event marked by the loss of a beloved actress. To those who had witnessed her final hours and analyzed her medical data, it was a case that defied categorization, a puzzle of biological phenomena, unexplained cellular behavior, and decades of accumulated medical history. Even within the corridors of Cedars-Sinai, the autopsy room itself became symbolic of the hidden complexity behind the public story. While the fluorescent lights now illuminated empty tables and sanitized equipment, the memory of the mysterious reactions, the missing files, and the whispered observations persisted among those who had been present. The disparity between public reporting and the hidden medical truth underscored a broader issue in medicine and media. The selective narrative that reaches the public can obscure the extraordinary complexity of life and death, especially when powerful institutions and celebrity privacy are involved. In Diane Keaton's case, this selective narrative ensured that while the world mourned a legendary actress, the profound mysteries of her body's final reactions remained largely unspoken, leaving a lingering question about how much of her true story would ever be revealed. Following Diane Keaton's autopsy, medical professionals and researchers began exploring possible explanations for the unusual reactions observed in her body. 3 primary theories emerged, each offering a distinct lens through which to interpret the perplexing findings. The first theory focused on an autoimmune reaction. Experts hypothesized that decades of prior illnesses, treatments, and immune system challenges could have triggered an extreme autoimmune misfire. In such a scenario, the body's immune cells, which usually defend against infections, may have begun attacking healthy tissue, particularly in the lungs. This could explain the unusual coloration, faint glow under blue light, and misfiring cellular activity noted during the autopsy. While autoimmune disorders are not uncommon, the severity and speed at which Diane's system appeared to fail were extraordinary, leading specialists to speculate that a rare, previously undocumented form of pulmonary autoimmune disorder might have been at play. Some researchers even suggested that her prior phototherapy treatments, meant to treat basal cell carcinoma, may have inadvertently sensitized her immune system further, exacerbating the effect. The second theory examined the long-term consequences of phototherapy and ultraviolet light exposure. In the 1980s, Diane had undergone several high-intensity UV sessions to treat skin cancer, a standard procedure at the time. While these treatments help prevent scarring and manage lesions, modern research suggests that excessive UV exposure can alter cellular DNA and potentially trigger lingering photochemical reactions. Remarkably, during the autopsy, certain lung tissues displayed faint bioluminescence, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as cellular memory of prior light exposure. Experts speculated that the light-induced DNA changes could have subtly altered not only the skin, but also internal organs, creating unexpected responses in cells decades later. Although the concept of photomutation remains largely theoretical, This theory provided a potential link between Diane's past treatments and the peculiar cellular activity observed in her final hours. The third theory centered on metabolic and drug-related complications. Records indicated that in the final week of her life, Diane had been prescribed a broad-spectrum antibiotic to manage potential infections. However, blood tests revealed that her body absorbed very little of the medication, likely due to long-term digestive issues stemming from her earlier eating disorder and nutritional challenges. This lack of absorption may have caused chemical imbalances, producing rare toxic compounds in her bloodstream. Her plasma displayed unusually high lactate levels, suggesting that her metabolism was under extreme stress. Specialists described this as end-stage metabolic reversal, a state in which the body's natural processes begin to produce harm rather than sustain life. This theory aligned with observations of fluctuating oxygen levels, irregular pulse, and the unpredictability of her bodily responses in the final days, indicating that even minor interventions could trigger disproportionate physiological effects. While each theory offered plausible explanations for specific aspects of Diane Keaton's condition, no single theory could fully account for the entirety of the unusual findings. Some experts propose that the true cause might be a combination of all three: autoimmune misfires, residual effects from UV treatments, and metabolic imbalances working in concert over decades. This complex interplay of factors could explain why her body displayed such unprecedented cellular behaviors and why the anomalies observed during the autopsy were never fully captured in official reports. Across the medical community, the case became a subject of quiet intrigue and debate. Whispers in hospitals, laboratories, and professional circles suggested that Diane's body had pushed the boundaries of conventional medical understanding, leaving specialists to confront phenomena they could not easily categorize. The anomalies, combined with the official silence and missing documentation, created an enduring mystery that would continue to challenge medical professionals, illustrating how even decades of research and clinical experience could fall short in the face of the extraordinary complexity of human physiology. While the medical mysteries surrounding Diane Keaton's death have captivated attention, her personal life offers essential context for understanding the unique challenges her body faced. Diane was not only an iconic actress, but also a woman whose experiences and lifestyle choices influenced her long-term health in profound ways. Throughout her career, she faced immense pressure to maintain a youthful and flawless appearance, particularly in Hollywood's relentless spotlight. Early in her career, the expectations to conform to rigid beauty standards contributed to periods of intense stress and the development of bulimia nervosa. In her memoir, Then Again, Diane candidly described a cycle of eating and purging, explaining that it was both a response to internal emptiness and a coping mechanism for external pressures. While she overcame this disorder, its effects on her body persisted. Medical studies have demonstrated that long-term eating disorders can damage the digestive system, alter metabolic processes, and weaken immune function, factors that, decades later, may have played a role in her body's unusual response to illness. Beyond nutritional challenges, Diane's career subjected her to prolonged physical and psychological stress. Filming schedules were often grueling, with long hours under bright studio lights that exposed her skin to harmful ultraviolet radiation. At the time, phototherapy was considered a standard and effective treatment for basal cell carcinoma, but repeated exposure over years likely had cumulative effects on her skin and underlying tissues. Doctors and dermatologists later suggested that this chronic UV exposure contributed to long-term cellular sensitivity, which may have compounded autoimmune responses and tissue anomalies observed in her autopsy. Diane's personal life, including high-profile relationships and the emotional intensity of romantic entanglements, added another layer of stress. Her relationships with Woody Allen, Warren Beatty, and Al Pacino, while deeply meaningful, were marked by emotional highs and lows, intense public scrutiny, and periods of isolation. Psychologists often note that chronic emotional stress can weaken the immune system, disrupt hormonal balance, and exacerbate pre-existing medical conditions. For Diane, these factors may have silently influenced her physiological resilience and vulnerability over time. Despite these challenges, Diane maintained a remarkable commitment to self-care and routine. She continued walking her dogs daily, practiced moderation in her diet, and took care to avoid excessive sun exposure. Yet, Even these efforts could not entirely counteract decades of accumulated medical and environmental influences. Her meticulous attention to personal habits, gloves indoors, wide-brimmed hats outdoors, and careful dietary monitoring illustrated both her determination to protect herself and the enduring impact of earlier health challenges. Additionally, Diane's intellectual and emotional engagement provided her with psychological resilience, which may have allowed her to maintain mental clarity even as her body weakened. She read extensively, engaged in meaningful conversations with friends and colleagues, and pursued creative projects that nurture her spirit. Observers who visited her home described a quiet, orderly environment, filled with books, art, and photographs, elements that reflected both her inner life and the care she took in curating a safe and comforting space. In essence, Diane Keaton's body and health were profoundly shaped by her life experiences. The interplay between public pressures, personal struggles, medical treatments,